I'm Ken Carty. I was the Director of Research for the British Columbia Citizens Assembly on Electoral Reform, really one of the first major Citizens Assembly exercises a number of years ago. I'm quite excited about what's happening here in Ireland because earlier Citizens Assemblies were rather disconnected from the institutions of the state and political class. They were set up by governments, but then really kind of left to kind of make their own way. And their results came either to referendum or reports to government. The innovation that we're going to see here in Ireland, of course, is the actual involvement of a number of politicians in the exercise itself. And this is really going to provide an opportunity for the political class and the citizens to kind of work together in this kind of project. And that's never been tried before. And I think that the opportunities for refining the Citizens Assembly, the People's Convention exercise, that opportunity that's going to be played out here in Ireland is really a kind of remarkable one. And so I think that this innovation shows all kinds of promise. And one could imagine that it might not go well, but if it doesn't, then we'll learn something about that as well. So I think that this is really one of the more interesting experiments that we're going to have.
My name is Patrick Fournier. I'm a professor of political science at the University of Montreal in Canada. I have studied deliberation in a variety of contexts. Most importantly, I've studied the citizen assemblies that took place in two Canadian provinces, British Columbia as well as Ontario, and as well in the Netherlands. And in all three cases, they were a process where a group of randomly chosen citizens were brought together to decide what should we do about the electoral system. Should it be reformed? Should it be changed for something else? And so for an extended process where they were working for almost an entire year, a group of between 100 and 150 citizens were working on this topic, trying to decide what was best for their own jurisdiction. And we learned a great many things about citizens' capacity for competence, because in their everyday life, citizens typically don't care, they don't follow politics, they're not interested in politics. Well, if you offer them the chance to say, we want your views and we'll give you a chance to provide input, and your voice can actually have an impact, a real impact on politics, then in that context, they will devote the time, the effort that's needed to do a good job. They actually basically became experts on electoral systems.
My name is Eiríkur Bergman. I'm a professor in politics, but I was also one of the elected members in Iceland's Constitutional Council, which had a task of drafting a new constitution for Iceland. This was an exercise which was initiated after the Icelandic economical collapse, which was quite significant, not only a crisis in the economy, but also a crisis in politics. And one of the demands of the people was to restart a new constitutional reform process, which had been pending for 70 years since Iceland became a republic, but had fallen into the trenches of party politics. And so Parliament decided to set up a process in 3 steps. First was an citizens' assembly, a national forum, it was called. 1,000 civilians came together and deliberated on the principle for a new constitution. Then you had a specialist committee, and then a nationally elected constitutional council of 25 members who were elected to draft a completely new constitution for Iceland. So there are similarities to the Irish case, but there are also fundamental differences.
Of course, it's very easy to be very cynical about this process, both about the overburdened agenda, about the composition of the group. But on the other hand, if you say, well, that's a reason for not doing it, then you ignore possibilities of deliberative democracy and you ignore other ways of involving the public. So I think this process should go ahead, we should give it a try, but I'm not overly optimistic about the potential of solving real problems.
I'm a methodologist for the G1000 project, which was a huge deliberative event in Belgium, which was organized about a year ago. And the idea was to bring 1,000 people together just to discuss a certain number of issues relating to the future of Belgium. These issues were immigration, the financial crisis, and social security. And we're here presenting some of the results from the data gathering, from what we found to be the key issues according to Belgian citizens relating to the future of Belgium.
I'm here to obviously welcome the idea of the convention, but also to report on some research that I've been doing, which has been looking at the way that people think about the idea of political reform. We've been working with quite a range of citizens in focus groups and getting them to talk about politics. Obviously they spend at least half their time simply moaning about how dreadful and terrible politics actually is, but then you can eventually get them to talk about what they'd like to change. And I think really three main lessons came out of that process for us. One is that the kinds of reforms that people are interested in are not necessarily the reforms that political elites propose. So that's going to be an issue for the convention, because the convention has obviously come up with a set of reform proposals, but it may well be that actually the citizens themselves are not so interested in those particular measures and actually think other measures might be more relevant to tackling the issue of people's disenchantment with politics. I think the second thing is that, contrary to lots of people's predictions, which is that people actually don't care about process, they really only care about outcomes, I think that we found that when we asked people, some people said, oh, they just like different outcomes, sort of dealing with immigration issues or dealing with the reforms of the National Health Service, etc. But actually, most people's suggestions were about process, about the way that politics actually worked and operated. And that brings me to the third observation, which is that we were slightly surprised that most people's suggestions weren't necessarily about giving citizens themselves a great deal of new power. So there wasn't a lot of emphasis on new direct forms of participation or using referenda or using more direct forms of engagement. Very much the emphasis was on saying it would be really nice if representative democracy actually worked the way it's supposed to work in the textbooks. And a lot of the reforms were about trying to get elected representatives to relate to citizens and deal with them in a way that actually respected the representative democratic process.
This is truly innovative in that this has not been done before, where you have a convention that discusses constitutional matters that includes both citizens and representative political parties, and in this way this form of integrated approach is to be welcomed because it ensures that there will be a clear link between the recommendations coming from the group and responses from the houses of the Oireachtas, and that responsiveness element is a core component, will be a core component to its success, so that the recommendations will be read, will be discussed, and there will be feedback given to those who've been involved in this process, whether or not the recommendations are accepted. That will be important particularly for the citizens and for wider society.
The trend towards democratic innovations, towards new ways of governing and conducting or doing politics is an international trend, and I think that the things we did in Belgium very much relate to what people are doing in Ireland, are doing in the United States, are doing actually all over the world. So the interesting thing is that the organization in Belgium was a bit different from the organization in Ireland, and I think that the different designs, the different ways in which the projects were funded, the different ways in which they were organized actually leads to more understanding of how we can innovate democracy and how we can make these democratic innovations and citizen involvement in politics really effective.
The issues that the Irish citizens are confronting are very widely shared in all of the mature established democracies. We all face similar difficulties in terms of the connections between our politicians and citizens and the way that the representative political process works. The impact of austerity has only really heightened our concern about the way in which politics works and operates. So I think if the Irish manage to make a bit of a breakthrough on these issues, there'll be lots of people trying to follow and watch what they're doing.
Well, I think if it's successful, it will really make a major step forward in the use of these kinds of assemblies, because it will provide a model for the way in which the existing political class and citizens' conventions can work together. And I think that if it's successful, it will be copied probably fairly widely.
The idea that you send away a bunch of constitutional lawyers or were still a bunch of party representatives to sort this kind of thing out, I think is very 20th century. I think the 21st century does require the direct engagement of citizens.
The purpose of today's event, the reason why we decided to organise it, is we thought it would be a useful opportunity to hear from experts. We have in the room here international experts. So the opportunity to hear from them about how it worked, what were the good points, what were the bad points, and what sort of lessons we in Ireland can learn from them about how we might want to do it ourselves. So that's the exercise we're going to go through the next couple of hours.
Just for those who aren't from Ireland, just a very brief summary of our own constitution.
And we helped them. We gave them all the scenarios. There was live streaming from the Citizen Summit itself.
You had BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera. Everyone was involved there, and they was branding this as the world's first crowdsourced constitution. Which is not really correct, but it was something we could play on and use to gather momentum with the public.
Unfortunately and sadly, I have to draw this session to an end.
The second session, which is a little bit more technical. So we'll turn first, I think, if we just go through the way they are on the programme. First of all, Clodagh Harris from UCC.
Providing an overview of recent initiatives, recent deliberative and participatory initiatives that have taken place in an Irish context.
And more importantly, the level of satisfaction in the public is very far from the level that was reached inside my city.
Coming from Britain, it's somewhat ironic that I'm talking to you about constitutional change, since we don't actually have a written constitution, and we have very little prospect of having a convention after the constitution is done.
How do we get ordinary people to realise this actually will make a difference?
Well, I'm actually studying a module on political participation and mobilisation under Dr. Clodagh Harris at the moment. So we were very intrigued to come up and listen to the discussions.
I'm not sure about getting the politicians involved. I think where it has worked before, it has been a citizens-based initiative, and I think that's one of the strengths.
But we can go a little further here. That looks a bit technical, and I don't want to go here into technical details, but this is based on a so-called item response analysis coming from intelligence research.
So what we try to do is offer an assessment of how legitimate we think the G1000 project is in Belgium.
So even those who have deliberative capacity, maybe they're not actually changing their minds, which is the way that we usually measure, whether deliberation works or not. So it's quite possible that people with high deliberative capacity are staying in the same place and we're not seeing them, and then people with lower capacity are moving or whatever. So I'm just going to go through this fairly quickly because I want to leave a little bit of time for questions.
The first speaker seemed surprised that people might be a bit ambiguous on torture.
Make clear what we do with that. If we're fine with that, yeah, but I mean, it's something one has to discuss a bit further, because I think the way what is a good outcome is not defined as clearly as it should be.
Well, we've had a long afternoon, so many of us are going to be meeting again in months' time in Belgium to have another version of this, so we'll have further time to talk then.